All right, good morning or good afternoon, whatever time you guys are listening to this. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Layman's AI podcast. I am Adam,
And my name is Brian.
and we are very happy today because for the first time, and hopefully it's the first time, and then we have more, we have a guest with us today, coming to us all the way from Australia. So it's kind of funny. Brian and I are recording this on a Sunday night, and meanwhile, it's the next day already in Australia, and it is the morning. So I'd like to welcome Angelina Jayuraja to the show. She goes by the name Ange. So
hmm
Ange, welcome to our show. Say hi to everybody that's listening.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Brian. So excited
hmm
to be here.
hmm Glad
We're
to have you.
definitely excited to have you here. We put a little poll out on LinkedIn and said if anybody was interested to be a guest, and you were one of the first ones who responded, and you were the one that we thought was most serious about this. So that's why we chose you, and we're really glad we have you here. I know you have a podcast. I'm going to talk about it in a minute when I do your intro. Very exciting stuff you're doing and exploring the emerging technologies. It's excellent. And we're excited to have you here today. Hopefully, we can get a little bit of an idea of your background and how you're using AI and some things you've seen, and we can learn a little bit from you.
Yeah, keen to get into it.
Well, we're going to get started. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about your background, okay? So, Ange comes to us with over a decade of experience in financial services. Ange has built a career spanning legal, compliance, governance, and digital transformation roles across diverse range of organizations, from traditional financial institutes to startups and crypto exchanges. This journey has given her a broad and practical understanding of how technology continues to reshape financial landscape. And currently, she's the co-lead of a pilot AI program based in Melbourne, Australia, where she's deeply involved in exploring the impact and integration of artificial intelligence in enterprise settings. Ange is also the founder of the and host of the Chronicles of Emerging Tech podcast. Like I said, if you guys get a chance, make sure you check out an episode where she speaks with industry leaders and business minds about the latest developments in technology with a strong focus on AI and other emerging technologies. Ange is passionate about the intersection and innovation and industry and how emerging tech can be harnessed to create meaningful change. All right. Hope I got everything in that bio correct.
That's great. Yeah.
All right. So, Brian, will you take the first question and then we'll go from there?
Yeah, absolutely, not a problem. So first thing we want to kind of ask you is, how did you become interested in AI, and kind of what drew you to kind of focus on that field?
Yeah. And thank you so much for the introduction and the question. In terms of my interest in I would say that I've always had an interest in emerging tech in general. If we were to go back,
Mhm.
10 years ago, in the space in Sydney, especially, we had quite a big tech boom where there was a lot of startups and a lot of fintechs that were coming up in the space. And so, as a young 20-something-year-old, seeing all these, very young founders coming out with these great ideas, a flood of startups and fintech in the industry, it got me very interested in sort of that emerging tech space in general. So I sort of started off being very interested in the startup space. And then, crypto was coming up at that time, getting a lot
Mhm.
of exchanges popping up around sort of 2013, 2014 onwards, especially in Australia. We were sort of catching up to the rest of the world, I guess, tech wise. And then there was just this massive boom. So I'd always had an interest in tech. And so it happened quite organically in the sense that as sort of time progressed and we went from startup into crypto into automation into sort of coding, and then AI, and then the LLMs to Gen AI and now to
Mhm.
agentic AI. It was quite an organic sort of interest that kind of grew in the emerging tech space. And so for me, it was when I started to really explore, it became really aware of just how much was happening in the tech space, the
Mhm.
quantum technologies and transhuman technologies and
Mhm.
smart cities. And so it kind of opened me up very organically into this whole new kind of world of emerging tech. And so it just kind of organically happened. It just sort of made sense
Mhm.
that my interest in AI would grow as sort of the areas of technology grew, and I became sort of more aware of the different sort of layers of technology that was out there and growing. And so it really kind of became second nature in terms of focusing that in my work, because as you mentioned in the intro, I'm a legal risk and compliance professional. And
Hmm.
so with any kind of technology, there's always a risk element. There's always, governance frameworks that you need to put in place. There's always risk mitigation and assessments that need to be done. So again, it sort of organically kind of happened as part of my career and my work. And given sort of the different industries I've worked in, financial services, startups, crypto, it sort of just made sense that
Hmm.
it would become a big part of my work, whether it be
Yeah.
me just having an understanding of the technology and how companies are using it.
Hmm.
And that sort of really sparked sort of that passion in being able to use those technologies in my day-to-day work.
Yeah, I think
Nice.
pretty much every kind of line of work. I know this happened with me in the automation industry. Once AI started coming out and machine learning, I work with machines. I tell machines what to do, and that kind of I kind of had that same sort of aha moment, like I got to learn this essentially. So that's kind of seems to be
Hmm.
a global, worldwide thing. I know, Adam, you had the same thing with the education industry
I
as
did.
well.
I'm in the education industry, and I had a moment. I've shared it already on the podcast in earlier episodes, so I don't want to dive too much into it. But long story short, we caught a student cheating, using it, and that's how I learned what it was. And I had a moment where I said, "This just changed everything," uh,
Hmm.
and it definitely did. It definitely
Mm.
did.
Yeah, I found
So
out you can write essays with AI now, which kind of scary, but kind of nice too. But
it
anyway, go
is.
ahead.
There's a
Sorry, I cut you
possibility. I
off.
love the idea of summarizing long pieces of work for me, so I can
No,
use it to
definitely.
definitely summarize it to key bullet points. But then you have to verify that it did it correctly, which is
Hmm.
kind of interesting sometimes.
Yeah,
So
and like a big part of that, the again legal kind of regulatory compliance piece is
right.
I don't have to go scaling through 13, 14, 15 different legislations or regulatory standards trying to understand,
Hmm.
what applies, document, reviews. It can be summarized very quickly. I know
Hmm.
it's kind of crazy. I talk to so many people in different industries running businesses, small to, large size, and all of them are saying, I don't have to pay someone to look at contracts anymore. I can just run it through AI
Hmm.
and get
Yeah.
it to summarize it for me. And, very sort of, it doesn't even have to be the whatever it is, chat GPT, what is it,
Hmm.
5 now?
It's
Yeah.
five.
Yeah, I think
Not
it is
even,
kind of five. Yeah.
is it 5? I'm only 4. I'm a bit, I think there was an update recently, but I'm not great at keeping on top of updates. So please do correct me if I'm wrong.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, using it's almost becoming very sort of almost just you don't even have to pay someone to look at contracts
Yeah,
anymore. You can
Yeah.
run it through an AI system to get it to summarize it and tell
Yeah.
you what you need to know. So um,
exactly.
the adoption is using it for these sorts of what you would consider quite time consuming
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
Hmm.
activities is definitely increased a lot.
Hmm.
Absolutely. You actually started to lean into our next question. So I know we know you used it for summarizing some legal documents, but what does a typical day look like for you when it comes to using AI or AI tools? Share some of them with us and just tell us what it looks like.
Yeah, I always look for me. The basics very much language learning models given sort of the type of work that I do in the legal compliance and risk space. So it's a lot of document summarization, reviewing legislation. But I've also used it to put, for example, when I started my podcast, I used it to help create a strategy in terms of
Hmm.
how to set my
Yeah.
podcast, how to market it, how to sort of like launch it on
Hmm.
LinkedIn. And so for me, on a day to day, I'm not using the tools from a very sort of high end, kind of high level sort of perspective. It's very much language learning models, generative AI, and in that sort of capacity. However, I have seen, and I've been very lucky given I run this podcast and I've been able to reach out and speak to so many people in the industry. I've seen startup ideas coming up with using AI to help you, if your pet is unwell, and if you want to
Yeah.
save yourself thousands of dollars going to the vet, you can run it through the system. You can look up symptoms and it can help you sort of
Hmm.
diagnose at what point you should be considering going to the vet. And people using it for mobility and motion and being able to really hone in on very individualized personal sort of diet plans, exercise plans. I had someone on my podcast who spoke about that recently. So the
Uh-huh.
level at which AI is being used, I mean, in the scheme of things, I use it on a very basic level, I would say.
Hmm.
But to see how it can be used in so many different industries. Like a few months ago, I was at the Australian Manufacturing Week, and I saw some of the big players in the manufacturing industry using AI as part of their robotics, for example. So
Okay.
it's, to me, I mean, I can talk to how I use it. I would say, in the scheme of things, of seeing how it's being applied, I would say I use it very basically. I
Hmm.
still am not tapping into the real strengths, and I'm not really using it to its full potential. So
Yeah.
Right.
I understand this is a layman's podcast, sort of
No,
AI.
I'm glad you're answering like this because
Hmm.
I am certain 80 to 90% of users across the world are at that level that we're at. We're using it as
Yeah.
helpful personal assistance to save us time, give us some ideas for things. I think
Hmm.
that's how 80 to 90% of the people are using it. When we see the stuff on YouTube, like the hype, I think that's a small percentage of people, but it seems like that's how most people are using it, the way social media makes it sound. And
Yeah.
I don't think we're there yet. And I don't think we're going to be there for a while. I think we're at that. We did a whole episode on here's some weird ingredients, make us some food. And I think most people are still at that fun phase of, okay, how can this help me out personally?
Yeah, and
And
Mm.
I'm wondering how much power they're using at the data centers right now, just asking them ridiculous questions. I know I did that a few times, but yeah, I think like a lot of people right now, when they think of AI, they're like LLMs, it's ChatGPT, and
Mhm.
that's one thing. That's just one thing, and they're kind of like a Google, excuse me, Google search on steroids, essentially. So, I
Mm.
mean, it is interesting to see like all these other tools are going to come out. It's like, okay, am I going to chat GPT a building or anything like that? But like you said, in the manufacturing industry, one of the big things, working in the industry myself, is that people are using like vision AI, where they identify quality parts and everything like that. That's one of the big ones, especially in robotics, because it'll
Mm.
say, okay, I need this part, and there'll be like a dozen different parts on a conveyor system, and they'll have to select the right one and put it at the proper orientation. That's been being used for a while now, and people didn't quite realize that. So it's like once you see LLMs come into the fray, they're like, "Oh, this is this brand new thing. What are we going to do with it now?" It's like it's already been here. This is just bringing it into the
Right.
forefront, essentially. But either way, I think next question, Ange, for you. Do you have like a specific example of how AI has made your work easier, more efficient? I think we may have already touched on the contracts and everything.
Yeah, in terms of my day-to-day work, it would definitely be using it, again, very sort of on the scheme of AI, using it sort of more foundational language learning models, generative AI, running document reviews, looking up different legislations, comparing documents, summarizing various pieces. So for me, on a day-to-day, because my work is quite um, document heavy,
Hmm.
there's a lot of, sort of review and reading. It cuts my
Hmm.
time by a lot.
Wow.
Having said that, very similar to what you were saying, Adam, it's not that you just take it at face value either. So obviously, if I'm getting something summarized or reviewed, I do go back and double check everything. That's always very
Right.
important, especially where we are at now in terms of AI. And
Hmm.
um, what I've also found is that your response, especially from a language learning sort of model like a ChatGPT or something like that, prompt engineering is very important. So I've actually been playing around with that a
Yes.
lot. I've
Hmm.
found that your response is only going to be as good as your prompt, and you have to be very, very clear, very I don't want to say blunt, but you have to be like, the room for misunderstanding a question sometimes in terms of what you're prompting versus what you get. Sometimes it's
Hmm.
just a matter of a few words.
Right.
So,
Hmm.
playing around with prompt engineering, and what I've actually found is the better and more clear and more succinct my prompts are, the better my responses as well. And that's helped a lot in my day to day work as well, because it's one thing to have everything summarized, but then if you're then spending an hour going through and making sure everything is
Hmm.
correct,
Verified. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, then again, you could argue, well, you're cutting down, 3 hours for one, sure, but I think that's something on a day-to-day, as you sort of use it and get better. Like, for example, especially in the language learning model side, prompt engineering, learning how to
Hmm.
prompt
Hmm.
is very important. And I'd
Oh, we
actually really
agree.
encourage anyone who uses it to play around with it when you've got some time. Prompt it in different ways. See how much
Hmm.
better, or how more succinct and how more insightful your responses are when you're sort of prompting it in a different way. So
Yeah,
I've definitely found that as well.
yeah,
It's actually
definitely.
what I spend in my free time is, I'll
Yeah.
I'll spend time prompting ChatGPT to see what I can.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, prompting is a big thing. And you could ask, very specific questions and you can get it like very specific answers. And um, kind of like going back, I had a thought. I did have a thought. Different LLMs are kind of like a big thing too. Some of them actually respond better in ways that kind of
Hmm.
people don't quite understand. It's like, oh, just use this LLM. I think we were going back to the ingredients one that we did where we had them, make different foods and what have you.
Yeah.
Grok actually gave us the best
Yep.
recipe. They gave us like a full cookbook page with, step by
Oh.
step measurements and everything. So that one did the best. But then we asked it a sports related question and it did the worst. Um,
The absolute worst.
the absolute worst. And
Yeah.
we've been open about how we use AI for this podcast and the images that we do. I've tried to do minimalist images and I found that Copilot is the best at minimal images. I don't know how that came about, but it just came about good like that. But
Mm.
it's not very good at a lot of other things. So
I am
I
curious.
mean,
I'm
me
going off.
personally,
I
I
want to go
really
off
like that
cuff.
because you can use different avatars.
hmm.
So
Oh, that's right. I wanted to
yeah,
go
so
off
that's
cuff on this next question, though. It's not on the list that we gave you. Well, what's your go-to AI tool, though? I am curious. What's your go-to AI LLM that you use the most?
I hate to be that person. It would be ChatGPT, only because that was the first one I ever used,
Yep.
um, way back
So
in the day, whatever it was. So,
that's you and
um,
me. I'm the same way. I am reluctant to ever give up my page subscription because I known it. I've used it for so long, but I got to admit I'm starting to get close to that taking the dive into Brian's world and going with the Gemini. I'm getting close.
Yeah,
yeah, I'm keen to try Gemini. Like, Copilot is something that I use quite a lot.
Mhm.
mhm.
ChatGPT is definitely the OG that I use. Grok is one that I've sort of played around with as well. And to your point, I find Grok, whenever I want to ask it sort of like a silly or like a kind of, you
Right.
know, out of center kind of question, I go to Grok because I find it to be the
That's
most sort of
Entertaining.
humorous.
yep.
And
Grok
well,
has
it's sort
humor.
of,
Yeah.
yeah, it's sort of it definitely sort of humors you and
Exactly.
gives you a response, and it always tends to make me laugh. So it's really interesting that I'm not the only one who notices that. You've noticed that as well, that different language learning
Yeah.
models are
Yes.
different
Yeah,
things.
because
Yeah.
I know Claude. I've used that for coding, and because it's like it was like basically built for coding. And if you try to have it give it silly responses, it'll say, you know what, I'm here to be professional. Let's just keep it that way. And I've actually tried. I think I asked it a question. I'm like, give me a little more bro in your answer, and it refused to do it. So it's kind of definitely different ones are a lot of fun. But anyway, staying on topic here. So, how is Australia, both business and public, reacting to AI? I know we have a lot of things going on in the US, but just curious of how is Australia responding to it?
You know, I might get flack for this, but I always find Australia tech wise, we're always sort of behind, in the sense of we always kind of wait to see what the rest of the world is doing.
Hmm.
Um, and it's really interesting because, in Australia, we like I said when I was talking about Sydney before and being sort of the tech hub where there was a lot of startups back in the day, and there's still quite a lot of interest in that tech space. It's been really interesting because there's definitely I would say maybe in the last sort of 6 to 12 months, there's been a real shift in business, um,
Okay.
especially coming from like corporate side that I'm from, especially with this whole new sort of agent, not new, I mean, agentic AI sort of been in in the works for a while, but that move towards agentic AI, I've noticed that a lot of business are taking that on board. And so what we've inevitably found, and I think this sort of happens, doesn't really matter where you're at, technology sort of speeds ahead, and the law and
Hmm.
regulations are trying to firstly understand what's going on, and they're trying to catch up. And I don't
Hmm.
think Australia is really any different in that regard. If you were to look at, for example, the crypto digital asset space, we've had that, exchanges since like 2012, 2013, whenever it was, and we still don't have any sort of real legislation around it in
Well, yeah, it's
so
not much different from the
it's
US either.
Right. It's
yeah,
the same.
yeah. So it's been 10 odd years, or what is it, 12 years, whatever it is, and
Hmm.
there's still sort of that back and forth of trying to understand this technology. And so I think it's been really interesting. A bit AI has been very different. I feel in terms of reputationally as well. If you were to take crypto, for example, versus AI, there's people a lot more open to it. There's definitely an appetite to use it. At this point anyway, it's seen as a bit more lower risk than something like a crypto or a digital asset. So it's been really interesting as well to kind of see the different technologies and how they're taken on board. In terms of public, I think a lot of people are very interested in AI. I will say, however, and this might be more a sort of a philosophical question, is I do think that we're not having certain conversations, especially with AI sort of coming into businesses, how that will sort of impact an already very difficult job market, for example. What that will look like in terms of long term. A lot of the times in businesses, and I attend panels and I go to events, industry events, and I like to hear sort of different panels and people in sort of the C-suite talking about AI, especially with agentic AI. And I think it's great. I think we definitely need to adopt and adapt and move forward in terms of bringing on technology. But I
Hmm.
do also think sometimes the discussions are 2-3 years ahead, not 10, 15, 20 years down the track.
Hmm.
And I understand with how quickly technology is changing. Like I said, this might be a philosophical question or
Hmm.
conversation, but I do sometimes think that, that maybe we're not having those discussions that we should be thinking in sort of what 10, 15, 20 years is going to look like. So, um, uh, yeah, that's sort of what I've found. And I would say in Australia in general, there's obviously an interest, there's an appetite for it.
Hmm.
Um, and again, I would be very curious to know if this is happening on sort of from your experience as well. It's like there's this interest to adapt AI, but then there's this sort of thing of not wanting to make it obvious that you're using AI,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Oh, we
Yeah, it
definitely
does.
have seen that. Yeah. We
Yeah, like the shadow use of AI, and so I think there's definitely a lot of shadow use of AI. And so, I mean, it's really hard to answer this question because overall, I would say there's an appetite for it, there's an interest for it, but I think businesses are sort of, steaming ahead.
hmm
Legislation, governance is trying to catch up. So everyone's kind of in this, I don't know, kind of a limbo sort of shadow use phase. There's this interest of wanting to use it, but then not making it obvious that you're using it. So it's a bit difficult to kind of answer this question.
Yeah,
I would like
we
to say overall it's quite positive reaction, but
mhm.
it's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. I mean, I feel like a lot of that sense is in the US. Depends on where you're at geographically.
hmm
Some areas that are more tech savvy are just all about it and just want to run
yeah.
blindly into the fire with it, which you can kind of want to hold back a little bit. But some areas where the tech wasn't where the rest of the country was to begin with, they're sort of anti-AI essentially. I feel like
Mm,
there's like some kind of political divide sometimes with AI. And yeah, it does sound a lot like in the US, and then there's like people who want to kind of block out the noise and try to figure out exactly what they're supposed to be doing with it. So
Yeah.
that's kind of been my experience essentially in the industry.
and I think with different technologies, it's really the knowledge that's out there and how you understand the technology. Like I advocate for AI, but I
Hmm.
don't know everything about it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know what the future of it's going to be like, and so I have I'm optimistic, but I'm very cautious as well. And I do attribute that to having that risk compliance sort
Hmm.
of background as well, of being kind of, um, carefully optimistic. And so it's interesting you bring up that sort of political
Hmm.
divide as well, in terms of trying to understand where where we sit, because I also, I wonder in terms of understanding the technology, when it must be very difficult trying to come up with governance and regulation over something that
You don't quite
you don't
understand.
necessarily
Right.
understand, and
Yeah.
you don't really know what the future is going to look like. And so, I mean, that's my other thing for businesses that are sort of, especially with agentic AI, businesses are going straight for it, and I understand
Hmm.
it from commercial sort of perspectives. But then I think, do we really know what this means in the long term? And that sort
Yeah.
of thing. So, and I back to what I was saying before, in terms of, we're looking at sort of the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but what does 10 years, 15, 20 years look, down
Yeah,
the track?
it's also harder to predict that far down the
Oh,
track
it's
too.
much
Oh,
So
harder.
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
because a lot of things. But I guess we could lead into our next question. What surprising ways have you seen AI that you didn't quite expect?
Um, Not that I didn't expect. Probably I was very surprised at the level at which it was being used, was
Hmm.
especially around sort of pattern recognition. So, for example, in my space, we do we deal with fraud detection and things like that.
Hmm.
So the level we've and various sort of transaction monitoring reporting, that's always been there. You've had retrospective reporting, you've had live reporting, but the level at which pattern recognition is now being sort of used, for these
Hmm.
sorts of things, to be able to detect, crime sometimes before it even happens. Like, that's really,
Yeah.
that really surprised me, because
Wow.
reporting has always been sort of in real time, or
Hmm.
retrospectively after it's happened, a month later or whatever it is. But now, and I believe it's sort of in testing. I'm not sure if it's actually been rolled out yet, but being able to use, because AI is constantly learning, and so being able to use
Hmm.
different patterns and behaviors to build profiles, and then be able to predict, behaviors before they happen, like, that is quite, again,
Hmm.
not surprising. I think the level at which it's operating is quite surprising to me.
Yeah, I
And
mean
so,
that.
very quickly, not quickly, AI's been around for a while, but
Mhm.
how quickly after adoption that's happening, and how quickly it's learning, that's really surprised me.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense because
AI is one of those things you shouldn't be surprised with. It's just
yeah. Yeah, I
so.
mean, no, it's okay. The cybercrime really does make sense because like we're talking about like hacking and everything like that. When you're looking at thousands and thousands of lines of code, a human eye can't like read that many lines of code. They can write it and they can generate it, but once it starts executing real time, they can't detect that. So like when you say like crime that's about to happen, like when people hack, they don't just like burst into the code, grab it and go like you're breaking into a store. They massage their way into the
Mm,
firewall, into the code, and once the human sees these patterns suddenly start to emerge, then it's too late. So that's where I really think AI, because I'm glad you brought that point up because that's kind of like how coding works, essentially, and AI can identify those patterns a lot quicker than the human eye can. So that
mm.
is
Hmm.
something I can definitely see being adopted very quickly.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
interesting. That's got me thinking, for
Hmm.
education. What happens when AI can start to identify a learning pattern in a student, or students with certain disabilities, and AI can learn this is how the pattern goes, this is how you need to scaffold a lesson to explain it. Like, there's some positives there. There's probably some negatives too, but I'm
Hmm.
trying to be optimistic. There's some positive with the AI machine learning, but it is interesting to hear how quickly you said that it was able to pick up that fraud and detect it. Uh,
Hmm.
that quickly. I just want to clear something up for some of our users, wow, some of our listeners. If you're listening and you don't know what agentic AI is, because we're going to talk about that in the next couple questions coming up. Agentic AI is basically a next level LLM. So instead of just looking at the command that you gave it, it's actually doing some work for you, such as like research on the internet. And it can actually do things like create a report, have have citations in it, create a PowerPoint based on that report. There are some things that agentic AI can do. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I did want to ask you, Ange, if someone in Australia or the United States, this is from your experience, wanted to start using AI and they wanted to start using it responsibly, like today, what would be the first step you would suggest that they do?
Well, I would say, thankfully, there are sort of international standards and things around AI. Even though maybe locally, there's still some work in terms of getting, specifically Australian governance AI regulation in place, or US sort of governance in place. There are international standards, and the OECD and the ISO standards, etc. So I think always having some sort of foundation in terms of governance is good. Just understanding
Hmm.
what the guardrails are, and understanding what the principles are is good. Obviously, I'm talking from that legal compliance and risk lens, so that's always important. I would also say, and this is a subject in itself, and by no means am I an expert, but things like bias, and sort of that ethical use of AI is very important as well. Understanding that, I think understanding that AI, it learns from what's already out there in terms of data. It's just taking the data that you're feeding it, or whatever it's available. It's just learning and it's collecting data. So it's still going to have, the biases, the inaccuracies, and things like that inevitably, as humans, we will be putting into the data out there. So I think take it with a grain of salt, in that, like what you were referring to before, Adam. Make sure you're
Yeah.
reviewing the materials that you're looking at, being very aware that it may not be accurate. There may be
Mm,
biases, and that sort of thing. So that's really important. I'd say the first thing is definitely getting around sort of that governance principles and the guardrails around how to use it, um, and even maybe just understanding its limitations. I think it's
mhm.
really important. I think that
Right.
that's where governance
Yeah,
comes in.
I think that goes back to a point that we like to make every single episode, and it's a tool. It's not
Mm.
your replacement. It's not your assistant. It's a tool. And I think that kind of falls into that. It's going to be wrong. Even, now for legal purposes, I'm just kind of looking at LLM on the side here. It says, Claude can make mistakes. Double check everything. So
Yes.
you kind of have to like keep that in mind. I think like basically, you kind of been going along what we've been saying as well, is that, don't rely on this. Like this is just something to help you. Like use the human brain as well.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
kind of
and
where I go.
it's always evolving. So that's
Hmm.
the thing, right? I think keeping on top of where it's at. There's certain functionalities that it didn't have 3 years ago that it now has, and so
Hmm.
inevitably,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's inevitable. I believe that it's only just going to keep learning and
Hmm.
tweaking itself and getting better. So functionalities will change. So it's always important to be across what's changing and what is still not um, what is still not there, or what we still need to kind of be conscious of or aware of. To your point,
Hmm.
it's a tool that we're using. So,
Hmm.
um, but the data that we're feeding it, it's data that we're collecting as humans. So I think that's
Hmm.
that's really important. Having said that, I don't know what the future is going to look like. I don't know how the self learning sort of capability of AI is like. We don't know. So it's always good to kind of be on top of that, I think. And it's
It's,
going into an area that I'm very interested in learning more of. It's not something that I necessarily completely have an understanding of at this point, but that, I guess, is the wonderful new world of AI that we're in.
Hmm.
I think you're right. It's going to be a journey. It's definitely going to be some type of a journey with a pathway that is not going to be the same for every person that uses it, as well as every company that's developing it. It's going to change drastically. I am curious where we're going to be in 10 years. I've got some of my own predictions. For example, don't I think prompting is a thing we'll be telling our grandkids about, that when we used AI, we had to
Hmm.
actually type in the commands ourselves. I really do. I think it's going to be much more voice and conversation based as we probably in the next 5 to 10 years. I would be surprised if prompting is completely out of left field in like 7 years. It would not surprise me.
I
Hmm.
think they're already. I mean, I'm not. Again, don't quote me on this, but I have a feeling they're looking into that voice prompting, are they not?
I think they are, and I personally I do know of the most recent ChatGPT 5 update. It's getting a little bit of flack from some users because you used to be able to pick which model it would respond to, and now it's kind of deciding what model it should use to answer your questions. And I think that's step one in that voice,
In
so
that
that when it
process.
talks to, yeah, it's learning, it's going to learn from us. Okay, this is a O3 research response versus this is an O4 or this is a 4.0 mini response. It's going to learn this so that when we get to that voice commands, it's going to be significantly better. And I do know you can talk to your ChatGPT voice thread and things like that. It's just not that good of a it's just not that good right now, but it's the worst it's ever going to be right now. That's the funny thing about AI. That it's the worst it's going to be is right now. So it's
And then it gets
interesting.
better.
Yeah. So speaking of which, we're going to talk about agentic AI now, a little bit more. And how do you see agentic AI changing the way of companies operate in the near future? I know we have a concern on this show that we've brought up that we do think there is going to be some pretty massive unemployment as a result of AI, but we think if we retool our brains and retool our workforce a little bit, there are some ways we can counter that. And I'm just curious to hear what kind of impact you think agentic AI is going to have in the near future.
I find this is an interesting question because my understanding of agentic AI is that it will essentially be an agent in the background that will, do so. A human, you go into work 8 hours, 7.5, 8 hours, whatever it is a day. You clock off for the day, you go home, work. Not that it stops, but in terms of that, agentic level work that you're doing stops until you log in again the next day. Agentic AI in the background is going to be doing those things. So it's going to be, to some degree, you might code it to do a certain action, but then there's going to be a level of it learning and going, okay, well, I've now made a decision that, I'm going to do this in the background, and this issue pops up. And let's try use an example. So let's say you are running a company and you have someone who does orders in the background. So you go in, you put an order on online or whatever it is, and usually a human will process it. They'll come in, they'll have a look at the order, they'll set all the different processes in motion, and then it's all submitted and done. You have this agent in the background now who's doing that. So it's been told, you've got to follow this 5-step process when an order is put in, and it's doing all that. As that AI, and this is what I believe is going to happen, is that as that AI is sort of working in the background, it's going to be collecting data, it's going to be teaching itself, it's going to be learning. And inevitably, it's going to run into, issues with orders and things like that. So then it's going to sort of think, okay, in this instance, what do I do? So, I mean, is it making a decision in that regard? There's sort of questions around that. So what
Mhm.
level of autonomy now is this agent going to have in the background to be able to, make a decision when it runs into an error, if it runs into a problem? How is it sort of teaching itself with the data it's being fed in terms of how to deal with this? And so in terms of that governance compliance bit, there's going to, I think, questions will pop up in terms of, at what level is there accountability for decisions that are being made? How transparent are, the decisions? What are the frameworks in place? If something goes wrong, who takes responsibility for that?
Hmm.
Because this
I
agent
think
in
that's
the background is making that
You,
decision. So
yeah, I think that's a question that not a lot of people want to ask or be asked.
we just brought that up in our last episode. Like if AI does something wrong, who's legally responsible for
right,
the agent, in particular the agent's performance? Is it the company? Is it the person who prompted it? Is it the
Mhm.
agent? We don't have
yeah,
answers to that, and we won't have answers in the United States until our court system, something happens, and then it gets in front of the court system, and then 2 to 3 years down the road, we'll have an interpretation of what that meant.
what that
Yeah, good
is,
luck.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good
Yeah,
luck.
so
Yeah.
this, and so when we talk about like agentic AI, yeah, you can definitely talk about how it's going to change the way companies operate, in the sense of, like you said, it's going to be 24/7 as opposed to 7, 8 hours in a day.
Hmm.
Um, there's probably going to be a lot more volume that it's going to go through. There's going to be, I think, a whole question around sort of that. And I know there is questions around this now around sort of sustainable AI, because there's obviously AI uses a lot of power and energy
Hmm.
and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of questions around the way it's going to change the way companies operate and then how it's going to impact businesses. But I always think about from that like legal governance sort of lens of, yeah, accountability. Who's going to hold accountability when decisions are being made? How does
Right.
that look? What level at which they're going to be operating? And then to what you both were saying earlier, we don't know what the future is. How can you, as much as we should be thinking about the next sort of 10, 20 years, how can you? Because tech is evolving so quickly. And, I
Hmm.
don't think any of us 10 years ago, it's interesting. 10 years ago, I actually wrote like a legal thesis on social media. And I actually had it published back in 2014. And I spoke about issues around data protection and privacy and being able to sort of manage that over jurisdictions, obviously on the internet, when you've got, jurisdictionless, no border sort of operations. And, these were real concerns and things that people far, far more intelligent and smarter than me were asking back then, 10 years ago. And 10 years on, those concerns are still very much concerns in terms of, data, privacy,
Right.
jurisdiction,
Hmm.
and we've seen with a lot of the, the different sort of court and, parliamentary, I think you guys would be like Senate committees in the US.
Yes, it'd be
Yeah.
the Senate, yeah,
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
House of
Big social.
Representatives, Congress. We have
Hmm.
a lot of people sitting around, and probably too many, but that's a whole another topic, whole other
Yeah.
podcast.
So, but, it's like, it's really interesting that the concerns that was had 10 years ago, they turned out to be quite valid concerns, and they're still, I don't think we've
Mm.
still really come to a decision on things around data and on in terms of, social media and the internet in general. So
Yeah.
it'll be really interesting to see when companies are sort of operating at this agentic AI level, at the levels at which they're implementing it, and what that would
Mm.
look like. You know,
Hmm.
the concerns that we have right now around agentic AI, or AI in general, I'm sure in 10 years will still be concerns. We may
Mm.
have
Right.
progressed it along. And so I always think that it comes back to what I was saying about, we're not necessarily having the discussions we probably should be having. Because I'm
No,
pretty sure
definitely.
there's still going to be, I do genuinely think that the concerns that we have now, it will still be very much concerns in 10 years, only because
Yeah,
I've seen that from my experience, so.
Hmm.
yeah, definitely not. I mean, I think we kind of touched on this too. We're not having like government's not having this conversation. And like you said, agentic AI, who's responsible for its decisions? We don't have anything laid out clearly, but people are still developing agentic AI, and we're not even close. We haven't. Well, last time we had comprehensive internet regulation in the U.S. at least, people were using dial-up. And now we're using AI, so we're so far behind on in the US anyways. But yeah, that's kind of lot of interesting thoughts, like when you bring up the who's responsible for agents, what decisions they make, how do they come to these conclusions. That's kind of well, I wrote the agent. Well, my agent uses this LLM. Well, we never told your LLM to use it that way, and now we're just kind of it's pickle in the middle, really.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it from like an operational perspective of agentic AI and what that will
Hmm.
do. Um, and again, what you were saying about the job market. But then I think there's a bigger sort of question, um,
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying in terms of
Yeah,
accountability,
exactly.
transparency, all these sorts of things. And
Hmm.
again, it's a difficult thing to have a discussion about because, again, we've always sort of had to find a balance between innovating. We don't want to stop innovation. We want
Hmm.
to innovate and we want to progress, as a society technologically. But at the same time, we need to have some sort of framework, some sort of,
Hmm.
governance in place. And so there's always this back and forth between the two. We don't want to overregulate
Yeah.
and stifle innovation, but we don't want to just run headfirst into something that we have really no idea of, what that's going to look like in the future. So
Hmm.
they're all
Exactly.
very philosophical questions, and it's probably another discussion altogether. But I do have a
Well,
lot of thoughts from the
Yeah.
philosophy of it all.
I think
well, I'm
we
glad.
just had a three-part series about this
Yeah,
philosophies,
yeah. Well, I'm
but
glad we're talking about the future because that happens to be the next question. So,
yeah, let's go to something happy.
yeah,
We're gonna pivot to
yeah,
something happy.
yeah. What's a
So
future AI development that you're personally excited about?
um, that's an interesting question. Look, I am quite excited about agentic AI. Don't get me wrong. I'm
Hmm.
very curious to see how this plays out. I think, aside obviously the governance pieces around it, I'd be very curious to see how operations changes. I'd be very interesting to understand sort of that circular, I don't know what you want to call it, circular economy around sort of
Right.
how agents talk to each other and different agents do different things, and what that whole circular sort of loop is going to look like. And I'd be curious to see how, very interested to see the role that humans play going forward in terms of managing systems, and the really new exciting jobs that will be created as a result. So
Hmm.
it's not all doom and gloom. I
mhm.
do think there is some positives that's going to come out of this. So I'm excited about seeing where agentic AI goes. Um, yeah, I think in general, anyway, technology, has been changing so quickly. I'm very curious to kind of see, not just AI, but quantum, for example. I'm really interested to see how quantum technology is going to be in the next few years, what that can do. So, um, yeah, no, there's a lot of emerging technologies that we can get really excited about to see what will happen. But in terms of AI development, I'm very curious to see I'm excited to see how agentic AI develops and how it's implemented and what it can achieve and what
Excellent.
our role will be after that. Yeah.
Hmm. Excellent. Brian, do you want to take the final one?
Yeah, sure. So what is a common misconception about AI you'd like to clear up? Because I know everybody has like when we talk about AI, they immediately go to Terminator 2 with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the movie back in the 90s, be like, that's what's going to happen. But no, I don't think so. But what is like kind of a misconception to you that you think you'd like to clear up?
I was going to go with the Terminator 2 one, but since
Oh,
you've got you,
oh man,
um,
we great minds think alike.
what's interesting, it really depends who you ask. So I actually did an episode on this where we spoke about sci-fi robots in sci-fi versus robots in reality and
Hmm.
how quickly that has changed. And what became very clear to me is how quickly, not quickly, but in terms of progression of movement, axis movements on robots and things like that, um, where Terminator was versus where we're
Hmm.
at, it's probably still, quite a ways away.
Hmm.
But what was really interesting was, I guess, understanding the motivations behind, well, the people who say that, AI is going to take over and it's going to be terminated, it's the end of the world, that sort of scenario. It's really the motivation behind this AI slash if it becomes super intelligence. What is the motivation behind that, right? So does AI really need to destroy humanity? I mean, it's a question, right? In terms of if we were to go to super intelligence, I know that there are a lot of learned people in the space who have theories about this, but I think more realistically is that what we have typically as humans, our place in society is going to change. So I think that's a misconception. I don't think it's necessarily going to take over in like a end of humanity kind of way. It will just make sort of us. It will change kind of our role in society. It was interesting when I had this podcast episode. We were talking about how we would become sort of the secondary being.
Hmm.
You would have
Wow.
sort of potentially AI, technology. You might have, talking about movies like a RoboCop sort of scenario. You're like AI, so it's, I think that the misconception of it necessarily ending humanity may not be correct.
Hmm.
It could just be that, our role will change.
Basically.
Yeah, the other misconception about AI is that it is the be all and end all, and it will, it is the source of truth, and it is the oracle in society, and it will save us from ourselves and this and that. I mean, at least where it's at the moment,
Hmm.
um, it is a tool, and it's
Right.
it's a tool that we use to help us and better what we're doing. It's not really, and it's prone to mistakes, and it's prone to inaccuracies, and it's prone to
Hmm.
bias and all those sorts of things. So this idea of it is the one and true source of truth, and it's always right. I mean, that's a misconception. Like you said, there's always a point where you have to go back and double check and make sure what you have there is correct, because it's going to be subject to the data that we feed it. And at the end of the day, it's essentially taking the data that we've fed it and
Hmm.
giving us the information. So it's all very data driven.
Yeah, it's
And I keep
all.
like we talk about data driven now, everyone's AI driven. It's really
Mhm.
interesting. The terminology has changed. So yeah, those are probably some misconceptions. But you know what? I'm going to put a disclaimer. I don't know what the next couple of years is going to look like. So
Yeah, I
Uh,
think uh, I think a lot of us.
in 5 years, it'll be very different. Who knows?
Yeah, we may be talking about AI in a completely different light in 5 years. I mean, nobody
right.
really knows. You just kind of have to go with it sometimes, I'd say. But yeah, I think yeah, like going back to the point of data. Like I think we did a brief episode on this. That's what's behind all of AI is just like so much data. And I know some people have said we've tapped all the data that's available to humans, but humans are continually making more data. For example, like if I'm running a factory, my machines are behaving a certain way, and that they're collecting data. So then AI can learn data from that machine. You as a human being, you have your own data. I'm just kind of trying to pull some uh, ideas away from that, but that's kind of what people need to understand and who's behind the data. Because you can put some really bad data out there, and you could have like an AI tool that can have some very um, sort of negative consequences if you have bad data as well.
Yeah, and also like another misconception that when you're talking about data, for example, yeah, AI is data. Like it's a
Hmm.
code, it's data, and it, a code can be hacked.
Hmm.
So this
Right.
misconception that AI
Yeah.
can't be hacked, like I've heard that before. Like
Hmm.
it's this new on the path to super intelligence, and there's no way it can be hacked by bad actors.
Hmm.
It's data, it's code. At the end of the day, it can
Exactly.
be.
Yeah.
So that's another misconception, which I probably should have spoken to as well. But
Hmm.
yeah, we brought up the data thing. I just thought about that. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of misconceptions actually about AI,
Yeah,
but I
it's gonna
don't I
be.
Yeah.
don't blame. Like I understand, because
Hmm.
it's an area. I'm not a technical person.
Yeah.
I'm from a very non-technical, sort of very traditional, I would say, sort of background of legal
Mhm.
compliance, very regulatory driven, very paper driven. So um, I rather write a lot of my notes and things down. I don't like to type to type.
Hmm.
That's how I am as a person. So I think uh, it's understandable, given the way the technology is growing. Something like AI, everybody's very excited about it. We don't really know much about it, so there's going to be a lot of misconceptions about it as well. It's very understandable.
Exactly.
That's one of the reasons why we wanted to ask it. Everybody's seeing a misconception, everybody has an opinion on it, and we always think that's a good question to ask somebody, and to even end on it, like what is something you can clear up? And
Mhm.
there's many answers, there's many misconceptions, and inevitably somebody's going to be right about one of those things we think is a misconception. Hopefully, it's not the Terminator thing. Hopefully, it's something a little nicer. But Ange, I just want to say thank you so much for
Mhm.
joining us, being our first guest. I found this very enlightening. Uh,
Mhm.
Oh,
it,
thank you
it,
so much.
it was very
No,
relieving for me to hear that like Australia's having some of the same issues we are here in the United States, because I like to think of you guys as like the United States in the Southern Hemisphere, like you guys are trendsetters, and I know you guys like sports over there. We like sports here, and so it's similar cultures, and just to hear that you guys are having the same problems we're having, and also the same good things as well. It was
Mhm.
great for us to hear it.
yeah, no, for sure, sure. Thank you so much for having me on. I hope I was able to provide some comfort and I didn't, raise more questions than I answered. So
Oh no, definitely not.
fingers crossed.
No, definitely not. No, I'd like to second that, Ange. Thank you for so much for being on the podcast. We're going to close it out here. And I'd like to, also, not repeating myself, thank you, Ange, for joining us today. Also like to, mention your podcast as well. Check her out, the Chronicles of Emerging Tech podcast. What platforms are you on, just to kind of give our listeners a little bit?
Yeah, at the moment I'm just on a Spotify, and I do have a LinkedIn page. I do have to get around to
Okay.
getting on more platforms. I can only just manage one at the moment, but
Hmm.
definitely trying to get a lot of different perspectives and
Okay.
thought leaders in various emerging tech. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So yes. So yeah, like I said, to our listeners, thanks for listening. Check out Ange on the Chronicles of Emerging Tech podcast, and I'd like to thank everybody for listening. My name is Brian,
And I'm Adam.
and we will see you next time on Layman's AI.